People always think kidnappings happen fast. A scream, a struggle, a van speeding away. But the truth is, sometimes the scariest part is what happens in the silence before anyone even realizes someone is gone. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She wasn't the type of person who had enemies. She wasn't rich in the way people imagine ransom victims to be. She wasn't living behind gates or surrounded by security. She was just an elderly woman with mobility problems, living a quiet life. That Saturday night, she did something completely normal. She went to her daughter Annie's house. They played games. They ate dinner. They laughed. And later, a family member drove her back home. The garage door opened at 9:48 p.m. That was the last confirmed moment anyone saw Nancy alive. No alarms. No screaming neighbors. Nothing. Just the garage door closing behind her. Nancy wore a pacemaker. It was connected through Bluetooth to her phone and Apple Watch. It wasn't something anyone thought about, until the night she disappeared. Investigators later discovered something chilling. At 2:28 a.m., her pacemaker disconnected. Bluetooth doesn't disconnect unless the device moves far enough away. Which meant one thing. Nancy left the house, or someone took her. But that wasn't even the worst part. A security camera inside the home registered movement at 2:12 a.m. It didn't record video. The subscription wasn't active. So all it captured was a timestamp. Movement detected. 2:12 a.m. And then, the outside camera had already been disconnected at 1:47 a.m. That meant whoever came that night was already there, waiting. For 41 minutes. 41 minutes inside or around the home of an elderly woman, before she vanished. And nobody knows what happened in that time. Think about it. If this was a quick kidnapping, why stay? If it was just robbery, why take Nancy? If it was ransom, why not grab her and leave? 41 minutes is not a mistake. 41 minutes is personal. Investigators searched everywhere. The desert, neighbor houses, even the septic tank. Nothing. No blood. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. It was like Nancy had simply stood up and walked into the darkness. But then came the ransom messages. $6 million. Bitcoin only. A deadline. And yet, no proof of life. That's when people started whispering the question nobody wanted to ask. What if Nancy wasn't alive anymore? Days passed. Then her children released a video. They looked exhausted, terrified, and they said something that felt wrong. They said they would pay. They said they wanted peace. They said they wanted to celebrate with her again. Celebrate? That word stuck with people. Because you don't celebrate after a kidnapping. You rescue. You reunite. But celebrate sounded like something else, like they weren't sure she was coming back alive. Or, like they already knew she wasn't. And still, the kidnappers didn't respond. No proof of life. No phone call. Nothing. Just silence. And silence is never normal in a ransom case. A former security expert went on television. He said something chilling. This isn't following the usual protocol. Because in real kidnappings, the kidnappers want money fast. The longer they wait, the more risk they face. So why stall? Only two explanations made sense. Either Nancy was already dead, or this was never about money. It was personal. Someone knew her. Someone understood her routine. Someone knew the cameras. Someone knew she was weak. And someone had 41 minutes to do whatever they wanted before taking her out of that house. The deadline came, 5 p.m. Everyone waited. News stations watched. The family waited. Investigators waited. But Nancy never came home. No dramatic drop-off. No hostage exchange. No closure. Just an elderly woman, gone into nothing. And the strangest part? Police spent hours inside Annie's house afterward, late at night. Windows covered, blue gloves, brown evidence bags, as if they were looking for something they didn't want the public to know. Something darker than kidnapping. Something closer. Something inside the family. Or inside those missing 41 minutes. Because maybe Nancy wasn't taken far away. Maybe she never left that night the way people think. Maybe the real horror isn't who kidnapped her, but what happened inside her own home before the Bluetooth signal finally went silent at 2:28 a.m., like her heart itself, disconnecting, and to this day, no one can explain the 41 minutes. No footage, no witnesses, no proof of life, just a timestamp and an old woman who vanished into the dark. So if you ever feel safe because your doors are locked, remember this: sometimes the scariest part isn't the kidnapping. It's the quiet time before it, when someone is already inside, waiting. Most people think kidnappings are loud. They imagine screaming, a struggle, a door kicked open in the middle of the night. But the truth is, the scariest kidnappings don't begin with noise. They begin with silence. And the case of Nancy Guthrie was silent in the most disturbing way possible. Nancy was 84 years old, an elderly woman with health problems, mobility issues, a pacemaker that helped keep her heart steady. She wasn't someone you'd ever picture in a ransom headline. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't living in a mansion behind guarded gates. She was simply someone's mother, someone's grandmother, someone who still tried to live normally, even as her body grew weaker with age. That Saturday evening, February 1st, started like any other. Nancy had spent the night at her daughter Annie's house. It wasn't anything special, just a family dinner. A few games, some laughter. The kind of quiet comfort older people cling to. Because those moments feel safe. Normal. The last time Nancy was confirmed alive was when she left Annie's house. A family member drove her home. Investigators never fully clarified who it was. Maybe Annie. Maybe Annie's husband. But whoever it was, they helped Nancy into the house. At 9:48 p.m., the garage door opened. Nancy entered through the garage. Some people later called that suspicious. But it really wasn't. For someone her age, walking up front steps was harder. The garage entrance was easier, more familiar, safer. The door closed behind her. The garage light went out, and Nancy was alone. Or at least, she thought she was. Nancy's home was the kind of place you'd expect to be peaceful. A quiet neighborhood. Neighbors who waved, but didn't pry. No signs of danger. No history of violence. Just the kind of suburban calm that makes people believe bad things only happen somewhere else. Nancy locked her doors. She took her medications. She probably did the same routine she'd done 1,000 nights before. Maybe she watched TV. Maybe she sat in her chair until she felt tired. Then she went to bed. And the world went dark. But here's the thing. The world didn't go dark for everyone. Because sometime after midnight, someone was already moving around her home. Nancy had security cameras. Not the most advanced setup, not something monitored constantly, but enough to detect motion. Enough to give the illusion of safety. One camera faced outside, another covered part of the inside. The outside camera was disconnected at 1:47 a.m. At first, investigators thought it might have been a glitch. Bad Wi-Fi. A power issue. Something harmless. But then they realized something terrifying. It didn't disconnect randomly. It was shut off. Deliberately. Someone didn't want to be seen. And whoever it was had enough time to do it carefully. Not rushed. Not panicked. Controlled. After that outside camera went dark, the house became a blind spot. A stage with no audience. A place where anything could happen. And no one would ever know. This is the part that makes people feel sick. Because the timeline doesn't make sense. At 2:12 a.m., the inside camera registered movement. It didn't record video. There was no active subscription. So it didn't capture faces. It didn't capture sound. All it captured was a timestamp. Motion detected. 2:12 a.m. That was it, just a digital ghost of something happening. Then, at 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker disconnected. Her pacemaker was connected through Bluetooth to her phone and her Apple Watch. Bluetooth doesn't disconnect unless the device moves too far away, meaning Nancy was no longer near her phone. Her watch was left behind. Her phone was left behind. But Nancy was gone. And between 1:47 a.m. and 2:28 a.m., there are 41 minutes unaccounted for. 41 minutes. Think about that. That's not a quick snatch and grab. That's not a sudden panic. That's time. Time for someone to search. Time for someone to talk. Time for someone to threaten. Time for someone to wait in the shadows, while an old woman sat unaware in her own home. What happened during those 41 minutes? That question is the heart of this horror. Because whatever happened was slow. When police arrived later, they expected chaos, broken locks, blood, furniture overturned. But the house looked normal. Too normal. No forced entry. No shattered glass. No obvious signs of struggle. It was as if Nancy had simply stood up and walked away. But an 84-year-old woman with mobility problems doesn't just vanish barefoot into the night. Not without help. Not without fear. So why was there no struggle? That's when investigators began considering the worst possibility. Maybe Nancy knew the person inside her house. Maybe she opened the door willingly. Maybe she trusted them. And trust is sometimes the most dangerous thing of all. Days passed. Then came the ransom messages. $6 million. Bitcoin only. A deadline. At first, it sounded like a typical kidnapping demand. But something was wrong. Because kidnappers want one thing above all else. Money. Fast. The longer they wait, the more likely they get caught. So why wasn't this moving forward? Why no proof of life? Why no phone call? Why no direct negotiation? Instead, there was silence. A strange, unnatural silence. And people started asking questions. Dark questions, like, what if Nancy was already dead? What if the kidnappers couldn't prove she was alive? Because she wasn't. Or worse, what if there were no kidnappers at all? What if the ransom was just a story, covering something else? Something closer. Something inside that house. The family released a video. 3 siblings sitting together. Their faces pale. Their eyes hollow. They said they would pay. They begged for Nancy's return, but even their words felt strange. Not desperate enough. Not frantic enough. Almost rehearsed. And one sentence stood out. We just want peace. Peace? Who talks about peace during an active kidnapping? Peace is what you want after a funeral, not after a rescue. The deadline was set for Monday, 5 p.m. Everyone waited. News stations watched. Investigators watched. The public watched. And Nancy remained missing. Somewhere in those missing 41 minutes, the truth was buried. And the terrifying part is, we may never know what really happened inside that house, before the Bluetooth signal finally went silent. Because part 2 is where things get darker. The FBI begins searching Annie's house late at night, windows covered, gloves on, evidence bags leaving. And the question becomes unavoidable. Was Nancy taken by strangers? Or was she taken by someone who already knew her? Someone who didn't need to break in, because they were already welcome. When someone disappears, police usually begin with the obvious. They search the home. They question neighbors. They look for signs of forced entry. But in Nancy Guthrie's case, the investigation didn't feel normal from the beginning. Because the deeper they looked, the stranger everything became. Nancy's house wasn't just a crime scene. It was a puzzle, and every piece of that puzzle felt like it belonged to a different story. The morning after Nancy disappeared, her family panicked. Calls went unanswered. Her phone was still inside the house. Her Apple Watch was still there. Her medications were still there. Everything she needed to survive was left behind. And yet, Nancy was gone. Investigators walked through the home carefully. They expected to find chaos. Instead, they found silence. A silence that didn't feel peaceful, but staged. Like the house was holding its breath. Waiting. They checked doors. Locked. Windows. Secure. No obvious signs of someone breaking in. That's when one detective muttered something under his breath that stuck with everyone in the room. Either she left willingly, or they didn't need to force their way inside. The timeline was already disturbing. But the pacemaker data made it worse. At 2:28 am, Nancy's pacemaker disconnected from her devices, meaning she moved far enough away to lose Bluetooth range. Her phone and watch were still inside. Nancy was not. That moment became the dividing line. Before 2:28 am, Nancy was in her home. After 2:28 am, Nancy was somewhere else, somewhere unknown. And whatever happened quietly. Investigators couldn't stop talking about the missing window. 1:47 am, outside camera disconnected. 2:12 am, motion detected inside. 2:28 am, pacemaker disconnect. 41 minutes. That wasn't an accident. That wasn't random. That was time. Time for someone to sit with Nancy. Time for someone to speak softly in the dark. Time for someone to convince her, or threaten her, or prepare her. People online speculated endlessly. Some said robbery. Some said kidnapping. But one former security expert said something chilling. Most kidnappings don't take 41 minutes. That's too long. Unless something went wrong. Or unless the person inside wasn't a stranger. As days passed, law enforcement expanded outward. They searched the neighborhood. They went door to door. They brought in dogs. They searched the desert outside town. They checked septic tanks. They scanned remote roads. All of it felt like desperation. Like they were trying to rule out the possibility that Nancy never left the property alive. Because when an elderly person disappears, the first fear isn't kidnapping. It's that they wandered off. Collapsed somewhere. But Nancy didn't have her coat, didn't have her walker, didn't have her medication. She didn't walk out into the cold night on her own. Someone took her. Or someone made sure she couldn't be found. Then came the messages. $6 million. Bitcoin. Deadline. It sounded dramatic. Almost too dramatic. And yet, something was missing. Proof of life. In most ransom cases, kidnappers provide something. A phone call. A photo. A recording. Anything. Something to show. We have her. But in Nancy's case, there was nothing. Just words. Just demands. Just silence afterward. The family asked for proof. None came. That's when investigators began whispering the worst possibility. What if the kidnappers couldn't provide proof? Because Nancy wasn't alive. Or what if they never had her at all? Then the investigation shifted away from Nancy's home, toward Annie's home, her daughter, the last confirmed place Nancy had been before returning home. At first it made sense. Police always investigate close family, not because they assume guilt, but because family is statistically the most likely connection. But what happened next felt wrong. Investigators arrived at Annie's house, late at night. Not during normal hours. Not casually. They stayed for nearly 3 hours. Neighbors noticed something unsettling. The windows were covered. Lights glowed behind curtains. And when agents finally left, they wore blue gloves. They carried brown evidence bags. Not paperwork. Not small items. Evidence. People online immediately speculated. Are they doing luminol testing? Luminol is used to detect blood. Even blood that's been cleaned. Even blood that's invisible. So why would they need luminol? At Annie's house? Unless they suspected. Something happened there. Something the public didn't know. Not long after, Nancy's children released their video. 3 siblings sitting together. They said they would pay. They begged. But their words felt strange. One sentence echoed through the internet. We just want peace. Peace. Not rescue. Not reunion. Peace. That word sat heavy. Because peace is what people want, when hope is already fading. And then came another unsettling phrase. We want to celebrate with her again. Celebrate? Who celebrates after a kidnapping? Unless they were speaking about her life, not her return. The public began asking questions that felt cruel, but unavoidable. Do they know something we don't? Has proof of life been given privately? Or are they preparing for the worst? A security expert pointed out another issue. Even if the ransom was paid, how would Nancy be returned? Kidnappers can hide online. They can use crypto wallets. But they can't hide forever. At some point, they have to deliver the victim, drop her somewhere. That drop-off is the most dangerous moment for kidnappers. It's where they get caught. So why would they drag this out? Why risk everything? Unless they couldn't deliver her. Unless there was no Nancy to return. By now, investigators were facing two possibilities. 1. Nancy was alive, but kidnappers were stalling. Or 2. Something went wrong during those 41 minutes. Maybe Nancy resisted. Maybe her health failed. Maybe she died. And the kidnappers panicked. Because an 84-year-old woman isn't easy to move. Not quickly. Not quietly. If she collapsed. If her heart stopped. If something went wrong. The entire kidnapping would become something else. Not ransom. Not profit. Just a cover story. A distraction. And as the Monday deadline approached, the silence grew heavier. No proof of life, no delivery plan, no closure, just an empty house, and 41 minutes of darkness. Because in part 3, we enter the most terrifying possibility. What if Nancy wasn't taken by strangers, but by someone who already knew exactly how to turn off the cameras, and exactly how long they had? Before anyone noticed, by the third day, the case stopped feeling like a kidnapping and started feeling like something worse, because kidnappings usually leave signs. A forced door, a broken window, a neighbor hearing a scream, something. But Nancy Guthrie's disappearance left nothing. Just absence, just silence. And silence is terrifying, because silence means the truth is hidden. Investigators kept returning to the same detail. No forced entry, no struggle, no chaos. That meant one of two things. Either Nancy was taken by someone extremely skilled, or Nancy opened the door herself. The second possibility was far darker, because it meant she trusted the person inside her home. She wasn't dragged out screaming. She wasn't attacked immediately. She may have been spoken to first, and that brought the timeline back again. Those missing 41 minutes. 41 minutes is too long for a stranger, but it's exactly the kind of time someone takes, when they already know you, when they don't need violence right away, when they can sit in your living room and talk. Detectives searched Nancy's home again, closer this time. They opened drawers, checked closets, looked behind furniture. Everything looked normal, too normal. Her purse was still there. Her medications were still there. Even small personal items were untouched. If this was robbery, why leave valuables? If this was ransom, why leave her phone behind? A kidnapper would want communication, control. But whoever took Nancy didn't need her phone, didn't need her watch. They wanted her removed from the timeline, not tracked, not heard from, just gone. That's when one investigator said quietly, this wasn't about stealing things, this was about removing a person. Nancy's pacemaker disconnected at 2:28 and became almost symbolic, like a heartbeat cutting off. Because after that moment, there was no digital trace, no GPS, no calls, no texts, nothing. An elderly woman disappeared in the modern age, without leaving a footprint. That's almost impossible. Unless someone planned it. Unless someone knew exactly what to leave behind. The public couldn't stop talking about Annie's home. Why did investigators spend hours there? Why late at night? Why the gloves? Why the evidence bags? Neighbors described it like something out of a horror movie. Unmarked vehicles, agents moving quietly, curtains drawn, no one speaking. And when they left, they didn't look relieved. They looked tense, as if they'd seen something they couldn't explain, or something they didn't want anyone else to know. Rumors spread quickly. Was there blood? Was there a struggle? Was Annie hiding something? But detectives never said. They never confirmed. They never denied. They just kept digging. And that silence was worse than answers. People began analyzing the family's video plea frame by frame. 3 siblings sitting together. Their expressions blank. Their voices steady. Too steady. If your mother is kidnapped, your voice should shake. Your eyes should break. But they spoke like people reading a statement. And again, they used that word. Peace. Not rescue. Not reunion. Peace. As if they weren't sure she was coming back alive. Or as if they already knew something the public didn't. The biggest red flag was simple. No proof of life. Kidnappers don't demand millions. Without proving they have the victim. Because otherwise, why would anyone pay? And yet the ransom messages continued. Bitcoin wallet. Deadline. Pressure. But no evidence Nancy was alive. That created the most disturbing theory. What if Nancy died early? What if something went wrong in those 41 minutes? An 84-year-old woman with health problems is fragile. If she panicked, if her heart failed, if she collapsed, then suddenly this wasn't kidnapping. It was something else. A disaster. A cover-up. And the ransom was just noise, meant to distract investigators. Detectives couldn't stop picturing it. 1:47 a.m. The outside camera goes dark. That's the first move. Someone is already close enough to disconnect it. Then, silence. The house sleeping, Nancy in bed, or maybe awake. Then, 2:12 a.m. Motion detected inside. That means someone is moving through her home. Slowly, carefully, maybe whispering, maybe standing over her bed, maybe speaking her name. Nancy, it's me, don't be afraid. 41 minutes. What happens in 41 minutes? Enough time to convince her to come quietly. Enough time to search for something. Enough time to stage the scene. Enough time for something to go wrong. Then, 2:28 a.m. The pacemaker disconnects. Nancy leaves the range of her phone. And she disappears. Experts pointed out something else. If kidnappers wanted money, they would want the exchange done quickly. But how do you deliver an 84-year-old woman? You can't just drop her on a street corner. She can't run. She can't hide. She needs care. The longer you keep her, the harder it becomes. Unless you never planned to keep her long. Unless she was never meant to return. That thought made investigators uneasy. Because then the ransom wasn't a goal. It was misdirection. By now the case felt less like a crime, and more like a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. The question wasn't just, where is Nancy? The question became, what really happened in her home? Because if this wasn't strangers, if this wasn't random, then the horror was closer, inside her circle, inside her routine, inside the people she trusted. And trust is what killers use best. The Monday deadline was approaching. The world waited for a ransom exchange, for a dramatic return, for proof of life. But instead, the silence deepened, and in part 4, we step into the most terrifying development yet. A new clue emerges, something that suggests Nancy may never have left that house alive at all. By the time Monday arrived, the case had stopped feeling like a rescue mission. It felt like a slow funeral that nobody wanted to admit was coming. The deadline was supposed to mean something. 5 million, 6 million, Bitcoin, a dramatic exchange, a return, a mother brought home alive. But nothing happened. No proof of life, no communication, just silence. And silence is never neutral. Silence is a message. At 5 p.m., reporters gathered. News stations went live. The Guthrie family waited. Law enforcement waited. Everyone expected something, even a small sign, a new message, a call, a location. But the deadline passed like a ghost. No ransom pickup, no instructions, no Nancy. It was as if the kidnappers themselves had disappeared. That's when investigators began shifting their focus away from ransom and toward something darker. Because kidnappers don't just vanish, not when millions are on the table. Unless money was never the point. Or unless they couldn't finish what they started. One investigator, speaking anonymously, said something chilling. "This doesn't feel like a kidnapping anymore. It feels like an event that already ended." That sentence spread like poison. An event that already ended. Meaning, Nancy may not be alive. Meaning, the ransom may be a lie. Meaning, the 41 minutes weren't preparation for captivity. They were preparation for something else. The family told reporters Nancy's medications were left behind. But detectives weren't satisfied. Because the medication detail was strange. If kidnappers planned to keep her alive for ransom, they would need her meds. An elderly woman can't survive long without them. So either the kidnappers were careless amateurs, or they never planned for her to survive long, or someone already had access to her medication, someone who knew what she needed, someone who could bring it. That detail made investigators uncomfortable, because it suggested familiarity, planning. A person close enough to know her health. The late-night search at Annie's home became impossible to ignore. Neighbors described it again and again. Blue gloves, brown bags, agents leaving quietly. That wasn't a casual check. That was forensic work. The kind of work you do when you suspect something happened there. Something messy. Something final. Rumors exploded online. They found blood. They found signs of a struggle. They're hiding it. Police refused to comment. But refusal is its own kind of answer. One neighbor said something that sounded like a horror movie. They covered the windows from the inside. Why cover windows? To block sunlight? No, to block eyes. To stop anyone from seeing what they were doing. Luminol testing glows in the dark. Blood reveals itself under blue light. If investigators were doing that, then the case wasn't about kidnapping anymore. It was about homicide. And the thought of homicide, inside Annie's house, was too horrible for most people to accept. But detectives don't get the luxury of denial. They follow evidence, even when evidence leads somewhere unthinkable. Investigators began looking at the 41 minutes differently, not as kidnapping time, but as staging time. Time to clean. Time to control cameras. Time to remove traces. Time to move a body. Because if Nancy died inside that house, moving her would be extremely difficult. An 84-year-old woman isn't light. It would take effort. Planning. Time. 41 minutes suddenly felt like exactly the amount of time someone would need if something went horribly wrong. Medical experts weighed in. Pacemakers don't just disconnect. They disconnect when distance increases, or when the device is destroyed, or when the signal is blocked. The disconnection at 2:28 am wasn't just a clue. It was a metaphor, a heartbeat leaving the digital world. After that moment, Nancy became invisible. No trace, no location, nothing. It was like she stopped existing. Kidnapping for ransom is transactional, money for a person. But this case didn't feel transactional. It felt emotional, personal, targeted. Someone didn't break into Nancy's house randomly. They knew about the cameras. They knew how to disconnect them. They knew she was vulnerable. They knew she couldn't run. And they knew exactly when she'd be home. That level of knowledge isn't random. That's intimate. That's someone in the orbit. Someone close enough to watch her routine. Someone close enough to wait. Professional kidnappers negotiate. They pressure. They provide proof of life. They keep communication open. But here, communication was awkward, delayed, almost fake, like someone was imitating what they thought kidnapping looked like, without understanding the rules. That's when one analyst said something chilling. This ransom demand feels like theater. Theater. A performance. A story meant to distract. Investigators began asking the question out loud. What if Nancy never left her home alive? That question was horrifying. Because if she didn't leave alive, then the kidnapping wasn't a kidnapping. It was a disappearance staged to look like one. And staged disappearances usually point back to one place: the people closest, the people trusted, the people with access. By now, the public was divided. Some believed Nancy was alive somewhere. Some believed she was gone. But investigators were moving quietly, away from ransom, and towards something much darker. Because in Part 5, a new development emerges. A detail from inside Nancy's house. That suggests she may have been awake and aware when the intruder arrived. By now, investigators weren't chasing kidnappers anymore. They were chasing a shadow, a story that didn't behave like a story should. Because every kidnapping case has patterns, and Nancy Guthrie's case had none. No proof of life, no clean negotiation, no clear suspects, just a quiet house and 41 minutes of darkness. But then, a detail surfaced. A detail that made detectives look at the home differently. A detail that suggested something terrifying. Nancy may not have been asleep. She may have been awake. Police never released full details of what they saw inside Nancy's bedroom. But one source hinted at something unsettling. The bed looked used, not abandoned. The blankets weren't neatly tucked like someone had been sleeping peacefully. They were disturbed, as if she had gotten up, or as if someone had stood over her. And then there was something else. A lamp beside the bed was found unplugged, not broken, not knocked over, unplugged. That is not something that happens by accident. Someone unplugged it. Why? To darken the room, to remove light, to control what Nancy could see. That small detail changed everything. Because it suggested Nancy wasn't taken suddenly. She was handled, controlled, manipulated. If the intruder entered while Nancy was awake, then those 41 minutes become unbearable to imagine. Picture it. An elderly woman hearing a sound. Soft footsteps. A faint click. She calls out. Who's there? No answer. Or worse, an answer she recognizes. A familiar voice. Someone she knows. Someone she trusts. Someone who doesn't need to force the door open. Because Nancy would open it herself. That possibility haunted detectives. Because the scariest monsters are the ones you invite inside. Experts reviewed the outside camera disconnect at 1:47 a.m. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't sudden. It was clean. Intentional. Like someone knew exactly where it was, exactly how to shut it down. That isn't a random burglar. That's someone who's been near the house before. Someone who understood the system. Someone who didn't rush. Because they weren't afraid of being caught yet. Investigators began whispering a theory that never reached the public officially. What if Nancy wasn't kidnapped from outside? What if she was taken from inside? Meaning, the person responsible didn't arrive at 1:47 a.m. They were already there. Already close. Already waiting. That would explain everything. No forced entry. No struggle. No noise. Because Nancy didn't fight. Until it was too late. 41 minutes. People kept asking, what takes 41 minutes? Now detectives had an answer, convincing an elderly woman, threatening her softly, keeping her quiet, allowing her to dress, searching the house, looking for something specific, or waiting for the right moment. Because an 84-year-old woman can't move quickly. Taking her out would be slow. Awkward, risky, unless she went willingly, unless she believed she was going somewhere safe. And that is the cruelest horror of all. Not violence. Deception. Another strange detail emerged. Nancy's shoes were missing. Not all of them. Just one pair. The pair she wore most often. Comfortable. Easy. If she was dragged out, why would she have shoes? But if she walked out, if she was told, "Come with me, Nancy, it's okay," then shoes make sense. That detail made investigators sick, because it suggested she wasn't screaming. She wasn't fighting. She was following. At 2:28 a.m., the pacemaker disconnected. That wasn't just distance. That was departure. Nancy leaving the safe bubble of her home, stepping into the unknown. But here's the terrifying part. If she left alive, why no proof afterward? No video, no call, no sound. It was like she stepped out of reality, like she crossed a line and vanished. Police returned to Annie's house. Again. Not once. Multiple times. Each visit longer. Each visit quieter. They weren't looking for kidnappers there. They were looking for answers. For something that tied Nancy's last evening to her disappearance. Neighbors reported seeing agents carry out more bags. Evidence. Not paperwork. Evidence. The kind of evidence that doesn't belong in a kidnapping case. The kind of evidence that belongs in a murder case. And the public began to feel it. This wasn't about ransom anymore. It was about truth. And truth was hiding somewhere close. Analysts called the ransom demands theater. A performance. Because real kidnappers don't stall like this. They don't go silent. They don't fail to provide proof of life. Unless they can't. Unless Nancy is not alive. Or unless Nancy was never with them. Unless the ransom was just a mask, thrown over something uglier. A staged kidnapping. A distraction. Detectives couldn't escape one possibility. Nancy may have recognized her abductor. She may have looked into their face, in her own home, in the dark, and realized too late that the danger wasn't outside. It was inside her life, inside her circle, inside her trust. That is why there was no struggle. That is why the cameras were shut down calmly. That is why the timeline feels personal. Because strangers don't get 41 minutes. Only someone close does. By now, hope was fading. The deadline passed. The ransom went nowhere. The evidence shifted toward something darker. And in part 6, we reach the most horrifying development yet. A clue suggests Nancy may never have left the property at all, and the kidnapping story may have been written after she was already gone. By now, the word kidnapping felt wrong, not because Nancy wasn't missing, but because the case didn't behave like a kidnapping case. It behaved like something staged, something rewritten, something that happened, and then was explained afterward. Because the longer investigators waited, the more obvious it became. Nobody was trying to get paid. Nobody was trying to negotiate. Nobody was acting like a real kidnapper. And that meant only one thing: the kidnapping story might have been created after Nancy was already gone. At first, law enforcement searched outward. The desert, the roads, neighboring towns. They treated it like an abduction. But by the second week, the search turned inward. Back toward the home. Back toward the family. Back toward the timeline. Because the timeline was the only thing that spoke honestly. And the timeline whispered something terrifying. Nancy disappeared too cleanly. Too quietly. Too personally. Detectives walked through Nancy's home again. And again. They were looking for something small, something missed, a trace, a sign of panic. But the home felt frozen, like someone had pressed pause. Her chair was still there, her kitchen untouched, her phone left behind. And the strangest part, no sign she ever prepared to leave, no packed bag, no coat, no emergency supplies. An elderly woman doesn't leave her home at 2:28 a.m. without being guided, or carried, or deceived. One investigator suggested something nobody wanted to hear. What if she never left the property? That thought changed everything. Because if Nancy never left, then the kidnapping wasn't a kidnapping. It was something else entirely. It meant she was hidden, buried, disposed of, somewhere close. And the ransom story was just noise, a distraction, a way to buy time. $6 million. Bitcoin. Deadline. It sounded dramatic, but it was hollow. Because there was no proof of life, no voice recording, no photo, no she's alive, do what we say, just demands. That's not how kidnappers operate, that's how people operate. when they want others to believe a story. A story that covers the truth. Nancy's pacemaker wasn't just medical equipment, it was a tracker. A digital heartbeat. It connected her to devices, to signals, to the modern world. So if someone wanted Nancy to vanish, they needed that signal to stop. And it did. At 2:28 am. The moment she left range. Or the moment something happened to her. Pacemakers don't lie. They don't create theater. They just record reality. And reality said, Nancy was removed. Quietly. Deliberately. The FBI's repeated visits to Annie's home became impossible to ignore. Not daytime check-ins, not casual conversations, night visits, gloves, covered windows, evidence bags. That wasn't about ransom. That was forensic work. That was blood work. That was the kind of work investigators do when they suspect something happened indoors. Something final. The public began whispering the unthinkable. What if Nancy didn't make it home safely that night? What if 9:48 p.m. wasn't the end of her evening, but the beginning of something hidden? The garage door opening at 9:48 p.m. was treated like a normal detail, but detectives began obsessing over it. Because garages are private. Garages are blind spots. A person can be moved through a garage without neighbors seeing. A person can be placed in a car. A person can disappear without noise. What if Nancy never walked inside? What if the garage was the last place she stood, and everything afterward was staged? The missing 41 minutes were once imagined as kidnapping time. Now detectives imagined something darker. Cleanup time. Cover-up time. Time to disconnect cameras. Time to remove evidence. Time to control the narrative. 41 minutes is long enough to rewrite a crime scene. Especially if the person inside already knew the house, already knew where everything was, already knew what to shut off. The family's plea video was supposed to be hope. But investigators watched it differently, not as desperation, as preparation, as if they were already speaking in past tense, without using past tense. They said they wanted peace. They said they wanted to celebrate. Those aren't rescue words. Those are memorial words. And detectives couldn't shake the feeling this family wasn't negotiating. They were performing. By now, investigators faced the darkest possibility. Nancy Guthrie may not be a kidnapping victim. She may be the victim of something closer, something personal, something planned. The ransom story may be the mask. A smokescreen. A way to keep everyone looking outward, while the truth stayed inward, because the most terrifying crimes aren't committed by strangers in masks. They're committed by someone who can stand in your home for 41 minutes without you screaming. By the time the second week arrived, people weren't asking if Nancy Guthrie would come home anymore. They were asking a different question, a darker question. What if she was never meant to come home? Because kidnappers want money, they want profit, they want a clean transaction. But this case wasn't clean, it wasn't profitable, it wasn't even logical. It was quiet, personal, wrong. And wrong stories don't end with ransom. They end with truth. No proof of life ever surfaced. No phone call. No photograph. No recording of Nancy begging. Nothing. Just the same empty demand. $6 million. Bitcoin. Deadline. Then nothing. The deadline passed. And the world realized something horrifying. The kidnappers didn't care about the deadline. Because deadlines only matter when you actually have something to exchange. And suddenly, the ransom wasn't a demand. It was a distraction. A story meant to buy time. Nancy's home remained untouched. Too untouched. Investigators kept returning to it, like the house itself was holding a secret. They rechecked every corner, every outlet, every camera wire, every footprint. And yet, nothing screamed kidnapping. No forced entry. No broken glass. No overturned furniture. Just absence. Just a life paused mid-sentence. And detectives began to understand. This wasn't the scene of a struggle. It was the scene of control. At first, everyone thought the 41 minutes were the kidnapping. But detectives realized they were something else. 41 minutes wasn't the time it took to take Nancy. It was the time it took to make sure no one could prove what happened. Disconnect the outside camera at 1:47 am. Move inside quietly. Leave no violence visible. Remove Nancy without chaos. Stage the home. Leave the phone behind. Leave the watch behind. Leave the medications behind. Because the goal wasn't ransom. The goal was disappearance. And disappearance requires planning, not panic. The late-night searches at Annie's home stayed sealed from the public, but people never forgot the image. Agents leaving with evidence bags. Blue gloves under porch light. Covered windows. Forensics in darkness. The kind of work that doesn't belong in a ransom case. The kind of work that belongs when investigators suspect something closer than strangers. Something inside the family orbit. Something hidden. Something unspeakable. And the scariest part was, police never denied it. They never said, "This is routine." They just stayed quiet. Because sometimes silence is confirmation. Nancy's pacemaker disconnect was the last honest signal she gave the world. 2:28 am. After that, she became invisible. No GPs. No calls. No trace. An old woman vanished in an age where nobody vanishes. And investigators understood this wasn't random. This wasn't opportunistic. This was targeted. Whoever did this knew her routine, knew her weakness, knew how long they had, knew what to shut off, and most terrifying of all, knew how to make it look like something else. Experts went on television. They said it didn't follow protocol. They said kidnappers don't stall. They said kidnappers don't fail to prove life. And one former agent said something that chilled the public. Either they can't provide proof of life, or they never had her. That sentence changed everything. Because if they never had her, then the ransom messages were theater. A mask. A script. And the question became unavoidable. Who benefits from a kidnapping story? If there was never a kidnapping, Nancy Guthrie was never returned. No dramatic drop-off, no reunion, no celebration, just a missing woman, and a case that rotted into silence. The neighborhood moved on. The news cycle moved on. But detectives never stopped circling back to the same missing 41 minutes. Because those minutes weren't empty. They were full. Full of something we may never know. Something that happened in the dark, before the cameras went blind, before the Bluetooth went silent, before Nancy vanished. And the most unsettling part is this. If Nancy opened the door for someone she trusted, then the horror wasn't a stranger breaking in. The horror was realizing. The person standing in her hallway didn't need to break in at all. They were already welcome. So if you ever feel safe because your doors are locked, remember Nancy Guthrie. Because sometimes, the scariest thing isn't someone forcing their way into your home. It's someone who doesn't have to. Someone who can stand there for 41 minutes while the world sleeps, and you never even get the chance to scream.